"I have found your wife," the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon announced over breakfast. "And before you refuse her, Sebastian, I should like you to know that she has already refused you, which makes her the only sensible woman in England, and precisely the reason I have chosen her." The Duke of Farringdon set down his coffee. Across the long table his grandmother, 81 years old, upright as a poker, sharper than any blade in the house, regarded him with the bright, pitiless affection of a woman who has run out of patience and does not intend to run out of anything else. "I have not asked you to find me a wife, grandmother." "No," the Dowager agreed. "You have spent 4 seasons declining to find one yourself, which amounts to the same request made more slowly. You have refused, by my count, the Hartwell girl, the Pembroke twins, both Sinclair sisters, the Fenchurch heiress, and a young woman whose name I cannot recall, but whose mother I shall never forgive. You refused them all, Sebastian, and do you know why? Because every one of them wanted to be the Duchess of Farringdon, and not one of them wanted you. And you, cold and clever and impossible as you are, knew it and could not stomach it. You will not be married for your coronet. I understand that. I approve of it. It is the one romantic thing about you, and you inherited it from me." She buttered her toast with the serenity of a general who has already won. "Which is why I have chosen a woman who does not want to be your duchess at all. My companion, Miss Anne Locke." Sebastian Vane, Duke of Farringdon, stared at his grandmother, as though she had proposed he marry the toast. "Your companion," he said, "the young woman who reads to you and manages your correspondence, and walks your appalling little dog. The very one. She has no fortune, none whatever, no family of any consequence. A dead clergyman father and a small pile of debts he left behind, which I have quietly settled, and which she does not know I have settled, and which you will not tell her I have settled, because she would be mortified, and she has too much pride to be mortified in my house." The Dowager's eyes gleamed. "No family, no fortune, no connections, and no interest whatsoever in marrying you. I mentioned the possibility to her a week ago, hypothetically, mind, as an old woman's foolishness, and she laughed. Sebastian, she laughed and said, 'Your Grace, the Duke would sooner marry his library, and I would sooner marry a man who noticed I existed, and as your grandson has managed to share a house with me for 8 months, without once learning my Christian name, I think we may both rest easy.'" The old woman took a triumphant bite of toast. She was quite right, of course. "You don't know her name. Go on, tell me her name." Sebastian opened his mouth. He closed it. "You see," said the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon, with insufferable satisfaction, "this is precisely the problem, and precisely the solution. You have lived under the same roof as the finest young woman I have met in 40 years for 8 months, and you have looked straight through her the entire time, because she is poor and quiet and carries my shawl, and a duke does not look at the woman who carries the shawl. And she has looked straight through you, because you are cold and arrogant and have never once been kind to anyone who could not advance you, and a sensible woman does not waste her attention on a man who has none to spare. You are the two most guarded, most solitary, most quietly lonely people I have ever known, and you have been circling each other for 8 months, like 2 cats who have each decided the other is furniture. And I am 81, Sebastian, and I have decided I am not going to die without seeing you loved by someone who does not want your money, and she is the only candidate in England, and so I have chosen her, and now I am going to spend whatever time God grants me, making the 2 of you look at each other, and there is nothing either of you can do to stop me, because I am old and rich and bored, and entirely without shame." There was a silence. "Her name," said the Duke of Farringdon, slowly, "is Anne." "Progress," said his grandmother. "Anne what?" He did not know. And the Dowager Duchess saw that he did not know, and she smiled the smile of a woman who has just found the exact, soft place in the armor of the most impregnable man she knew, and she pressed her thumb into it with the ruthless love of the very old. "Locke," she said gently. "Anne Locke. She is 24. She has gray eyes and a way of going very still when she is trying not to say the clever thing she is thinking. And she thinks a great many clever things, Sebastian, more than you do. And she never says the cruel ones, which is more than can be said for either of us. She has been alone in the world since she was 19, and she has never once complained of it in 8 months. And she reads Done to me on the nights I cannot sleep. And last winter, when I had the fever, she sat up with me 6 nights running and told the physician she would not leave. And she is the best person in this house, and possibly in this county, and my own grandson does not know her surname. The old woman's voice, for the first time, lost its edge and turned to something nearer to pleading. Look at her, Sebastian. That is all I ask. I am not commanding you to marry her. I could not, and I would not. She would refuse, and she would be right to, and you cannot command a heart. God knows, I tried with your grandfather for years before I gave up, and simply loved him. I am asking you only to look at her. Truly look, the way you have never looked at any of the heiresses. And if you look, and there is nothing there, I will never mention it again, and I will die disappointed and hold it against you in heaven. But I do not think there will be nothing there. I have watched you both for 8 months. I think there is a very great deal there, and I think you are each too proud and too frightened and too well defended to have noticed, and I am too old to wait for you to notice on your own. So, that is my scheme. I have told it to you plainly because I am too old for cleverness. Now finish your coffee and go and find out what the woman who has lived in your house since spring is actually like. It will be the most interesting thing you have done in 4 seasons. I guarantee it. And the Duke of Farringdon, who had entered the breakfast room a cold and settled man with no intention of marrying anyone, left it 20 minutes later, in a state of profound and unfamiliar disquiet, because his grandmother had done the one thing his 4 seasons of fortune hunters had never managed to do. She had made him curious. He found her in the small morning room, because that was where Miss Anne Locke could always be found at that hour, dealing with the dowager's vast and demanding correspondence. And Sebastian, pausing in the doorway before she saw him, did the thing his grandmother had asked, which he had somehow never done in 8 months. He looked. She sat at the little writing desk in the window, a plain gray gown, her dark hair simply dressed, a pen in her hand and a stack of the dowager's letters before her, and she was frowning very slightly at one of them, and as he watched, she murmured something under her breath, a dry private comment on whatever the letter contained, and her mouth curved, just for a moment, at her own joke, before she smoothed it away and wrote her careful reply. And Sebastian Vane, watching a woman he had passed in his own halls 100 times, felt the strangest sensation, as though a piece of furniture he had never regarded had turned out, on inspection, to be a window, and through it, he could see a whole room he had not known was in his house. She was not beautiful in the way the heiresses were beautiful. She was something he had no practice in valuing. She was interesting. There was a quickness in her stillness, a whole vivid inner life pressed down under the discipline of a dependent woman, who has learned that her thoughts are not wanted aloud. She had, he saw, exactly the quality his grandmother had named, the going still to keep from saying the clever thing, and he found, with a jolt, that he wanted very much to hear the clever thing, that he had spent 4 seasons among women who said everything, and it had bored him witless, and here was a woman, visibly full of things she did not say, and it was the most compelling thing he had seen in years. "You may come in, Your Grace," Anne Locke said, without turning around. "You have been standing in the doorway for rather a long time, and it is unlike you to hover. Has something happened? Is your grandmother unwell?" "No, she is." He came in. "She is in appalling health, entirely herself, and eating toast as though it had insulted her." "No, nothing has happened." "Then to what do I owe the honor?" She turned, at last, and looked at him, the gray eyes steady, faintly wary, entirely unimpressed, and he understood that she meant the word honor with a very slight and very deliberate irony, because in 8 months, the Duke of Farringdon had never once sought her out, and they both knew it. "If you are looking for her Grace, she is at breakfast. If you are looking for the gray dog, he is under that chair and he has one of your gloves, and I am afraid it is past saving." Sebastian looked at the chair. The gray dog looked back at him with a defiant eye and the wreckage of a very expensive glove between its paws. "Keep the glove," he said. "Miss Locke, I find I have a confession to make, and I dislike it, so I shall make it quickly and badly. I have lived in this house with you for 8 months, and until an hour ago, I did not know your Christian name. I knew you were my grandmother's companion. I knew you carried her shawl and read to her and managed that animal. I did not know you were called Anne, or that your father was a clergyman, or that you read Donne, or—" He stopped, aware he was saying more than he had meant to. My grandmother told me all of it this morning, at some length, and made me feel the precise size of my own rudeness, which she is very good at. I have come to apologize. It seems to me a great discourtesy to share a roof with a person for the better part of a year and never trouble to learn who they are. I am sorry for it. That is all. I shall let you return to your letters." Anne Locke was quiet for a moment, studying him with those steady gray eyes, and he had the uncomfortable sense of being read, accurately and without much flattery. "She set you on to this," Anne said. "It was not a question. Your grandmother, she has been threatening it all week. She has some notion that you and I—" A faint color rose in her face, but her voice stayed level. "Well, you will know what notion she has, if she has told you as much as you say. And you, being a dutiful grandson to a very old woman you love, have come to be polite to the companion, so that she may feel her scheme is progressing, and then in a week you will go back to town, and the whole thing will be forgotten, and I will still be here reading Donne. Your Grace, you need not. I am fond of your grandmother past all reason, and I know exactly how she is, and I will not hold her matchmaking against you any more than I hold the weather against you. You may tell her you looked. You have looked. Honor is satisfied. I shall not require you to keep looking. I have a great deal of correspondence, and you have a great deal of whatever it is you do, and we may both be spared the awkwardness of pretending to an acquaintance that neither of us sought, and the difference in our situations makes faintly absurd. There, I have said it plainly, which will save us both a month of discomfort. Was there anything else? It was, Sebastian thought, the single most bracing thing anyone had said to him in years. This dependent young woman, with no fortune and no leverage and every reason to court his favor, calmly handing him a graceful exit from his grandmother's scheme, wanting nothing, expecting nothing, protecting her own dignity by refusing to hope for anything at all. Every heiress in England had spent 4 seasons trying to catch him. Anne Locke had just, courteously and finally, tried to let him off the hook. And the Duke of Farringdon discovered that he did not want to be let off the hook. "Yes," he heard himself say, "there is one thing else. You have decided how this ends. The polite Duke, the forgotten scheme, the companion at her letters. And you have decided it because you are sensible and self-protecting, and you have been disappointed enough in your life not to wish to be disappointed again. And I understand all of that, because I am exactly the same, Miss Locke. Only I have money and you do not, which is the sole difference between us and a far smaller one than either of us pretends. But I find I do not accept your ending. My grandmother asked me to look at you. I have looked, and she was right. Damn her. I beg your pardon. She was right. There is a great deal there, and I have spent 4 seasons being bored to the edge of madness by women who wanted my title, and here is a woman who has just tried to get rid of me, and I find her the most interesting person I have met in years, and I am not going back to town in a week. I am going to stay, and I am going to learn your surname and your opinions, and every clever thing you go still to keep from saying, and at the end of it, we may both discover my grandmother is a meddling old tyrant who has thrown 2 solitary people together to no purpose at all. Or we may not. I do not know. But I decline to skip to the ending you have chosen out of fear. If you wish to be rid of me, Miss Locke, you will have to do it after you have actually let me look. Not before. That is the only thing I ask." Anne Locke stared at him. For the first time since he had known her, for the first time in 8 months of stillness, the Duke of Farringdon watched her be unmistakably surprised. "That," she said at last, slowly, "was a great many more words than I have ever heard you say at once. My grandmother has that effect. Apparently so do you." He inclined his head. "Good morning, Miss Locke. I shall see you at dinner. I have been informed you sit at the foot of the table, which I have also apparently never noticed, and which I intend to notice a great deal from now on." And he left her there, at her letters, with the gray dog and the ruined glove, and an expression on her steady face that she had not worn in years, and up the stairs, unseen. The Dowager Duchess of Farringdon, who had heard the whole thing from the landing because eavesdropping was among the few pleasures left to her, pressed her lace handkerchief to her mouth and thought that she might, after all, live to be very glad she had refused to die quietly. The Duke of Farringdon stayed. It astonished the household, which was accustomed to a master who came for a fortnight and left for the season, and it astonished Anne Locke, who had fully expected him to forget the whole business by Thursday. He did not forget. He appeared at dinner and drew her out on the subject of the sermons her father had preached and the poems she preferred, and listened, actually listened, turning her answers over, arguing with the good ones, and Anne, who had spent 5 years being spoken past, found herself speaking, cautiously at first and then less so, saying at last some of the clever things she had gone still to swallow, and watching the cold, austere Duke of Farringdon laugh at them, surprised out of himself, as though laughter were a language he had once known and forgotten. He walked with her in the mornings, on the pretext of exercising the gray dog, which had transferred its loyalty to him entirely, and now followed him about with the wreckage of a second glove. He came to the morning room and read while she wrote, the two of them in a companionable quiet that Anne found more dangerous than any conversation, because there is nothing so perilous to a guarded heart as the discovery that it can be quiet in someone's company and feel not alone but accompanied. And slowly, over the golden weeks of that autumn, the two most defended people in the county began, without quite admitting it, without daring to name it, to fall in love, in the careful, disbelieving way of people who have taught themselves for years to expect nothing and are frightened to the bone by the sudden arrival of something. The Dowager Duchess watched it all, with the fierce contentment of a general watching a campaign unfold exactly as planned, and had the wisdom, the very great wisdom, for so managing a woman, to say almost nothing, to sit back and let the thing she had started grow on its own, offering only the occasional log to the fire. A mention of Anne's kindness here, a request that Sebastian escort Anne to the village there, a sudden convenient headache that left the two of them to dine alone. She was too old and too clever to push. She had lit the match. She let it burn. There was one afternoon that undid the last of Sebastian's defenses, though Anne did not know she had done it. It was raining, and the gray dog had refused the walk, and so the Duke had come to the library, where Anne was returning the Dowager's borrowed volumes, and instead of leaving, he had stayed, and they had fallen, as they did more easily now, into talk, and somehow the talk had come round to his mother, whom he never spoke of, dead when he was 11, and Anne had asked about her, simply, the way one asks about a person and not a duke, and Sebastian had found himself answering. She was the only warm thing in this house, he said, surprising himself. My father was a great deal like I became, cold, correct. He believed affection was a weakness that people would use against you, and he was not entirely wrong, and he taught me the lesson so thoroughly that by the time I was grown, I had made myself into exactly the fortress he wanted. But my mother, she used to come to the nursery at night, after he was asleep, because he thought it made a boy soft to be comforted, and she would sit on the edge of the bed and read to me, and she smelled of violets, and she told me that my father was frightened, not cruel, that cold men are only frightened men who have given up hope of being warm, and that I must not let them make me one. He was quiet a moment. She died when I was 11, and there was no one left to come to the nursery, and I decided the safest thing was to become the fortress after all, because the fortress cannot be bereaved, and I have been the fortress for 24 years, and I had entirely forgotten the smell of violets until my grandmother made me look at you, and you read a poem aloud one evening, and something in your voice doing it. He stopped. Forgive me. I do not know why I am telling you this. I have never told anyone. There has never been anyone to tell. Anne Locke had gone very still. The stillness he had learned meant she was feeling something too large to say lightly. You are telling me, she said quietly, because I am safe. That is the thing no one understands about people like us, Your Grace. People who have learned to want nothing, and expect nothing, and keep the whole of themselves folded away. We are not cold. We are the opposite of cold. We feel everything. So much that we had to build the walls to survive it, and then everyone mistakes the wall for the man. Your father was not cold. He was a man who felt too much and was terrified of it. So are you. So, God knows, am I. She set down the book she was holding. My father was a poor clergyman who loved three things: his God, his books, and me. And when he died, I discovered he had loved them all so impractically that he left me nothing but debts and a good education and a heart that had never learned to protect itself. And I nearly did not survive the learning. I built my walls late and badly, and they cost me everything soft I had. And I have spent 5 years being the quiet, competent companion who wants nothing, and telling myself I preferred it. And then your grandmother, who sees everything, put me in a house with a man behind exactly the same kind of wall, and I have spent 8 months pretending not to notice that the coldest man in the county goes still, exactly as I do, when something reaches him, because I know that stillness, Your Grace. I invented it. I know precisely what it is hiding, because it is hiding the same thing mine hides. We are not two cats who think each other furniture. We are two people who recognized each other across a room the first week, and have been terrified ever since. The rain came down against the tall windows. The fire cracked. And the Duke of Farringdon looked at the woman across the library who had just described the whole architecture of his soul as though she had drawn the plans herself, and understood that his grandmother had not, after all, thrown together two strangers. She had reunited two people who had been, without ever speaking of it, keeping each other company in their separate solitudes for 8 months, each recognizing in the other the exact shape of a loneliness they had thought was theirs alone. You said the same thing my mother said, Sebastian said, very low, that cold men are only frightened men who have given up hope of being warm. She said it 30 years ago, and I have not thought of it since, and you have just said it back to me, word for word, without knowing. How is that possible? Because it is true, said Anne Locke, and true things are only ever said in a few ways, and lonely people all find their way to the same few. Your mother knew it, I know it, and I think, Your Grace, if you are honest, I think you have known it all along, and been more frightened of the hope than of the cold, exactly as I have. We are a matched set. Your grandmother saw it before either of us. She usually does. And she smiled. The real smile, the one she went still to hold back, and let him see it, on purpose, for the first time. And Sebastian Vane felt the last stone of a fortress 24 years in the building come quietly loose, and did not try to set it back. But Anne Locke was nobody's fool, and as the weeks went on, and her own heart betrayed her more each day, her fear grew, rather than lessened, because she understood, better than the Duke did, exactly what she was, and exactly what the world would say, and exactly how much further she had to fall. She said it to the Dowager one evening, plainly, because she loved the old woman too much to deceive her. You must stop, Your Grace, Anne said. She was brushing out the Dowager's white hair, a nightly ritual, and her hands were steady, though her voice was not quite. This scheme of yours, I know you mean it with all the love in the world, and I know, I am not blind. I know it is working, on him and on me both, and that is precisely why you must stop. Because when the season comes, and he goes back to town, and the world sees the Duke of Farringdon dangling after his grandmother's penniless companion, they will not find it charming, Your Grace. They will find it a scandal, or worse, a joke. They will say I schemed my way up from the shawl. They will say you were in your dotage, and I took advantage. They will make him ridiculous and me despised. And he is proud, Your Grace. As proud as you, as proud as I am. And one season of that mockery, and he will grow cold again to protect himself. And I will be turned off, and I will have lost not only the position but the friendship, which has become the dearest thing in my life, and which I never asked for, and cannot now imagine doing without. Her hands stilled. I would rather keep him as a friend I may not have, than lose him as a husband I was never permitted to keep. Do you see? You are offering me the moon, and I have learned, the hard way, that a woman in my situation who reaches for the moon ends by losing the ground she stands on as well. Please, let me keep my ground. It is not much, but it is mine, and I have been happier here these 8 months than anywhere since my father died, and I could not bear to lose it, because we all reached too high." The Dowager Duchess of Farringdon was silent for a long moment. Then she reached up and took her companion's hand and drew her round to sit on the edge of the bed, facing her, and she looked at the young woman with an expression Anne had never seen on that fierce old face, a kind of ferocious tenderness, the love of the very old for the young they will not be here to protect. "Now you listen to me, Anne Locke," she said, "because I am 81, and I shall not say this twice. I have buried a husband and 2 of my own children, and more friends than I can count, and I have learned exactly one thing worth passing on, and it is this: the only regrets that last are the ones for the things you were too frightened to reach for. Not the failures. The failures heal. I have failed at 100 things, and I can barely remember them. It is the things I wanted and did not dare. Those are the ones that ache at 81, in the dark, when I cannot sleep, and you are reading me Donne. Do you imagine I do not know what the world will say? I invented what the world says. I have been the world for 60 years, and I am telling you that the world's opinion is the cheapest thing there is, worth precisely nothing on the night you die, and that you are proposing to hand your one chance at a great love back to the shopkeeper because you are afraid of what the customers will whisper. I will not permit it. Not because I am a romantic. I am the least romantic woman in England, but because I love you, girl, as I would have loved a granddaughter, and I love that cold, impossible grandson of mine, and I have watched the 2 of you become, in 8 months, more yourselves than either of you has been in years, and I am not going to stand by and let 2 people I love talk themselves out of the best thing that will ever happen to them, because they are afraid of gossip. As for the world," the old eyes flashed, "leave the world to me. I have not finished with it yet. A Dowager Duchess of 81, who has decided to spend the last of her consequence on a thing she believes in, is a force, Anne, that the whole of fashionable England cannot withstand. Let them whisper. I will out-whisper them. I will stand up in every drawing-room in London and dare one soul to sneer at the marriage I made, and not one of them will have the courage, because I am old and terrible, and I know where all their grandmothers' bodies are buried. You are afraid the world will make him ridiculous. I promise you, child, I will make the world afraid to try. That is my last campaign, and I intend to win it. Your only task is to be brave enough to let yourself be loved. Can you manage that? It is the hardest thing I am asking. It is the only thing that matters." And Anne Locke put her face in her hands and wept on the edge of the old Duchess's bed, for the fear and for the hope, and for the almost unbearable kindness of being wanted, at last, by people who saw exactly what she was and reached for her anyway. And the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon held her companion and let her weep, and thought, with grim satisfaction, that the campaign was very nearly won, and needed now only its final engagement, which she rather thought her grandson could be trusted to manage himself, if she gave him the smallest push. She gave it the next morning. She did it by the simple expedient of taking to her bed and announcing, with the theatrical relish of a woman who has been robustly healthy for 81 years, that she felt her end approaching and wished to see her grandson at once. The Duke of Farringdon knew perfectly well that his grandmother was not dying. He knew it because she had summoned him with instructions to bring her lawyer, her jewel case, and the good brandy for the deathbed, and because a genuinely dying woman does not, in his experience, request the good brandy. He climbed the stairs to her chamber with the resigned expression of a man who loves an incorrigible old tyrant and knows he is about to be managed, and he found her propped against a mountain of pillows, rouged faintly, holding court, with Anne Locke standing pale and anxious at the bedside holding a cordial the dowager plainly had no intention of drinking. "Sebastian," the dowager said faintly, in a voice of theatrical frailty that would not have deceived a child, "you have come. Good. I feel my hour approaching. Anne, my dear, you may leave us. I must speak with my grandson alone. Go and compose yourself. You look dreadful. The poor child has been quite overcome by my decline." And Anne, who plainly did not for one instant believe the old woman was declining, but had been too well trained and too fond to say so, cast the Duke a look of helpless, exasperated affection, and withdrew. And the moment the door closed, the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon sat up straight, dropped the frail voice entirely, and fixed her grandson with a bright and ruthless eye. "Right," she said briskly. "She is out of the room. We have perhaps 10 minutes before she comes back to check I have not actually expired. Sit down and listen, because I am about to do the last and most important piece of managing of my life, and I want it done properly. I am not dying, Sebastian, not today. I am, however, 81, and I shall die reasonably soon by any honest reckoning, and that is the whole point of this ridiculous scene, so do not look at me with that expression. I have brought you up here under false pretenses, because it is the only way I could be certain of 10 minutes of your complete attention without that girl in the room, and because there is a thing you need to be made to understand, and you are exactly stubborn enough that you will not understand it until someone frightens you into it. So I have frightened you. You thought, climbing those stairs, for just a moment before you saw the brandy, you thought I might really be going. And in that moment, Sebastian, before you knew it was a trick, what did you feel?" The Duke was silent. "You felt the floor drop," his grandmother said, more gently. "I know. I have felt it. For other people, more times than I can bear. That is what love is, my dear. It is the person whose death would drop the floor out from under you. And I brought you up here to make you feel it, once, on purpose, so that you would stop pretending you do not know what it is. Because you do know. You have felt it about me for 30 years, though you would rather die than say so. And I want you to understand, while I am still here to say it to your face, that there is a young woman in this house, about whom you have begun to feel exactly the same thing, and that you are on the very edge of being too proud, and too frightened, and too worried about the opinion of people you despise, to reach out and take the one great good thing your whole cold life has ever offered you. And I will not, Sebastian, I will not go into my grave having watched you do it. So I am doing the only thing left to me. I am spending my dying, my eventual dying. Do stop looking stricken, not today. I am spending it on you. This is my will, and my legacy, and my last command, and it is not about money. Marry that girl, not because I arranged it, because you love her, and she loves you, and you are both too broken by pride to say so, and I am the only person alive who loves you both enough to sit here and force you to look at it. Now, she thinks the world will make you ridiculous. She told me so, weeping, last night, and it broke my old heart, because she was not afraid for herself, but for you. What do you say to that, grandson? The woman is refusing you. Refusing the idea of you, not to protect her own pride, but to protect yours. When did any heiress in 4 seasons ever do that? When did anyone? Sebastian Vane sat by his grandmother's bed and discovered that his throat had closed. "Never," he said, low. "No one has ever protected me from anything. It has never once occurred to anyone that I might need it. I am the Duke of Farringdon. I am the one with the power. It has not. In my whole life, grandmother, it has not once occurred to a single soul that I might be the one who could be hurt." He looked at his hands, and she thought of it. She sat and wept over the possibility of the world laughing at me, and decided she would rather give me up than see it, and I did not know. I have spent these weeks falling in love with her mind, her wit, the things she goes still to keep from saying, and I did not even know the largest thing about her, which is that she is the first person since my mother died who has cared what happens to me. Not to the Duke, to me. He stood, abruptly. "Where is she?" "She went to compose herself." "Where?" "The morning room," said the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon, sinking back into her pillows with the vast and total satisfaction of a woman whose final campaign has just been won. "She is always in the morning room. Go, Sebastian. Boy, go now. Before you think better of it. Before the pride comes back. Go and tell her that she does not have to protect you, because you would rather be laughed at with her than admired without her, and that the world may go hang, and that your grandmother said so with her dying breath, which she is entirely prepared to repeat as often as the plot requires. Go." And Sebastian, he had reached the door. He turned. "When she says she is not fit to be your duchess, that she brings nothing, that it is impossible, and she will say it. She is as proud as you are, and as frightened. You tell her that the finest thing that has ever come into this house came in 8 months ago carrying my shawl, and that I knew it the first week, and that I have spent my last strength making sure my fool of a grandson found it out before it was too late. Tell her that. Now go." And the Duke of Farringdon went, down the stairs 2 at a time, in a manner no Duke of Farringdon had descended a staircase in a century, and he flung open the door of the morning room, where Anne Locke stood at the window with her back to him and her arms wrapped around herself, and she turned, startled, her gray eyes red-rimmed, and he crossed the room to her before she could arrange her face into its careful stillness, and he took both her hands. "You wept," he said, "last night, to my grandmother, over the thought that the world would make me ridiculous if I married you. You were prepared to give me up, to give up the thing I can see in your face you want as much as I do, to protect me, from gossip, from being laughed at." His voice was not steady. "Anne, look at me. No one has ever tried to protect me from anything in my life. Do you understand what you did? You are a woman with nothing, no fortune, no family, no defense against the world at all, and you looked at the one great chance of your life, and you set it down because you were afraid it would cost me something. That is the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever done for me, and I did not even know you had done it until 10 minutes ago, and I find I cannot live another hour without telling you that it has entirely undone me. Your Grace, Sebastian. My name is Sebastian, and you have never once used it, and I should like you to, before I say the rest of this, because I do not want to hear it answered by a woman who calls me by my title." He drew a breath. "I love you, Anne. Not the way my grandmother arranged, or perhaps exactly the way she arranged. She is never wrong, and it is insufferable, but truly and entirely, and beyond any question of coronets or companions or what the world will say. I have spent 4 seasons being wanted by women who saw a duke, and 8 months not seeing the one woman in England who would have wept to spare me pain. And I have been a fool, and my grandmother has spent what she is pleased to call her dying breath, curing me of it, and I am cured. So I am going to say the thing you have been too brave and too frightened to let either of us say. Marry me, not to be my duchess. I know you do not want to be my duchess, and I love you the more for it, but to be my wife, my friend, the person across the room, the one who says the clever thing out loud at last, and lets me spend my life laughing at it. Marry me, and let the world whisper, because I would 1,000 times rather be laughed at with you than admired without you, and I have my grandmother's dying permission to say so, which she assures me she will repeat as often as necessary." Anne Locke stood with her hands in his, and the tears running down her face, and the whole careful fortress of her self-protection in ruins around her, and she did the bravest thing of her guarded life, which was to stop protecting herself and let herself be loved. "She is not really dying," Anne said, on a wet, unsteady laugh. "You know that. She had the good brandy sent up. I saw the footman." "She is not really dying," Sebastian agreed. "She is managing us both from a mountain of pillows and enjoying it more than anything in years. And she is entirely right about everything. And if you refuse me, she will simply keep pretending to die until you give in. So you may as well spare us all the theater and marry me now." "That is a very unromantic proposal." "It is the most romantic thing I have ever done. I have never proposed to anyone. I have spent 4 seasons ensuring I would never have to. Have pity, Anne. I have no practice, and I am terrified, and I have laid the whole of it in front of you, which I have never done for any living soul, and you are keeping me waiting." His hands tightened on hers. "Say yes, please. I have discovered I do not want to know what my life is like if you say no, and I would very much rather not find out. Marry me, be brave. My grandmother says it is the only thing that matters, and she is 81 and has never once been wrong about anything, which is the most annoying quality a person can have, and I have decided to spend my life acquiring it from her, starting with this." And Anne Locke, penniless, motherless, guarded Anne Locke, who had taught herself for 5 years to want nothing so that she could never again be disappointed, looked at the cold, impossible, lonely man who had learned, in 8 months, to laugh, and who stood before her now stripped of every defense, and asking her to be brave, and she found that she was, after all, brave enough. Yes, she said. Sebastian, yes. God help us both, and God help your dreadful, magnificent grandmother, who arranged the entire thing and will never, ever let either of us forget it. Yes. And from the top of the stairs, where she had of course dragged herself out of her deathbed to eavesdrop over the banister, the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon gave a single, sharp, triumphant crack of laughter and called down, in a voice of ringing and entirely restored health, "I heard that! I heard it! Ring for the good brandy. The real celebration, not the deathbed nonsense. And somebody bring me my grandson's fiancée, so I may look at her properly. I have won. At 81. Let it be recorded that I have won." They were married before Christmas, and the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon did exactly as she had promised. She outwhispered the whole of fashionable England. She rose from her theatrical deathbed with miraculous speed the moment the engagement was secure, and she descended upon London like a general, and she dared, with her 60 years of terrible consequence and her intimate knowledge of where every skeleton in the ton was buried, one single soul, to sneer at the marriage of the Duke of Farringdon to her companion. Not one dared. She stood up in drawing room after drawing room and announced that she had made the match herself, that Anne Locke was the finest young woman in England and had refused the Duke twice out of an excess of good sense before being persuaded, and that any person who found fault with her judgment was welcome to say so to her face, and no person ever did, because the Dowager Duchess of Farringdon at 81 was more terrifying than any scandal. And fashionable England, which will forgive anything except weakness, took one look at the old dragon guarding the match and decided, as one, that it had always thought the companion a charming girl. And Anne, quiet, clever, guarded Anne, became, to the surprise of no one who had actually met her, a magnificent duchess. Not in the way of the heiresses Sebastian had refused, all display and ambition, but in the way that mattered. She was kind, and she was just, and she had been poor and dependent, and overlooked, and she never forgot it. And so she saw the servants and the tenants and the poor of the parish as people rather than furniture, having been furniture herself. The estate flourished under her care. The cold, great house grew warm, and the Duke of Farringdon, who had been the loneliest man in England, came home each evening to a woman who said the clever thing out loud at last, and argued with him, and laughed at him, and had once wept to spare him pain, and he counted himself, correctly, the most fortunate man alive. The Dowager Duchess lived to see it, which had been the whole point. She lived, in fact, another 4 years, spry, terrible, and insufferably pleased with herself, long enough to see her first great-grandchild, a dark-eyed girl whom Anne and Sebastian named, without the smallest hesitation, after her. She held the child and wept, which she denied furiously ever after, and she told anyone who would listen, and many who would rather not, the entire story of how she had found her cold grandson a wife by choosing the one woman in England who did not want him, which is the whole secret of it, you see, the whole secret. You must find the one who wants the person and not the position, and there is only ever one, and you must be old and shameless enough to force them together before they ruin it with their pride. She died in her sleep at 85 on a spring night with Anne, who had insisted on it, who had sat up with her exactly as she had in the year of the fever, holding her hand, and her last words, spoken drowsily to the companion who had become her granddaughter in every way that mattered, were these: "I told you, child, the only regrets that last are for the things you were too frightened to reach for. You were brave enough in the end. That is the whole of what I leave behind, that I made two frightened people be brave. It is a better legacy than the money. Do not let him grow cold again when I am gone. He will try. You will not let him." And Anne promised, weeping, that she would not, and she never did. And the Duke of Farringdon never grew cold again, because he had been loved warm by two women who saw exactly what he was and reached for him anyway, one who chose him and one who was brave enough to be chosen. And there is no coldness in the world that can survive that. Years later, telling the story to their own grandchildren, the Duke and Duchess of Farringdon would always end it the same way. "She arranged the whole of it," Anne would say, "from a breakfast table and a false deathbed, the most shameless piece of matchmaking in the history of England. And Sebastian would add, every time, gravely, and she was right. About everything, which was, and remains, the single most irritating thing about her. And I would give the whole estate to be managed by her one more time. And the two of them would look at each other across the room, the way they had first truly looked, in a morning room full of letters, on an autumn morning, when an old woman refused to let two lonely people waste their lives, and be glad, every single day of the long, warm life they had almost been too frightened to reach for, that someone had loved them enough to force their hands.